check if it's being live streamed.
Okay, fantastic. The participants are trickling in, and just going to make it live on YouTube in a moment. And we'll get started in a minute.
Kunal, I need you to make me a host to be able to live stream on YouTube.
Okay, fantastic. We are going to try and make it live on YouTube ASAP. So thank you for your patience, all participants. Okay, just make me host back again. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, making it live in a few seconds. Almost there. Okay, going live in 3, 2, 1, and we are live on YouTube as well. So hello, everyone. Ciao, hola, bonjour, haribol, namaste. A very warm welcome to all participants from all parts of the world to this day number 3 of the inaugural BI Summer School, which also marks the 50th anniversary of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And we have today the science of the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, as the theme for this day 3 of the summer school. We have a fantastic lineup of lectures today by really esteemed speakers. The first one is about hermeneutic approaches to Bhagavatam's cosmologies by Krishna Kshetra Swami. Next is going to be consciousness-based life and speciation by Akhandadi Das. Venugopal Damola and Uma Pallavi are going to present about Mahamantra and spiritual care research, and Guru Prasad Raghavan about natural and artificial intelligence and modeling the mind. There are going to be a couple of interesting talks on Indic and Vedic archaeology by Rita Jene and Michael Cremo. And up last, but not the least, is going to be Mauricio Garrido, who will present about his recent launch of a book called Krishna and the Quarks. So I'm going to welcome now His Holiness Krishna Kshetra Swami. I hope he will be able to share his video with us. Krishna Kshetra Swami, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for being here. Just by means of introduction, I'm by no means qualified to do this. Don't feel qualified, but here it is. Krishna Kshetra Swami, also known as Dr. Kenneth Valpe, is a research fellow of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and of the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. He is also the co-director of the Bhagavad Purana Research Project. Very fortunate for us to have you, Krishna Kshetra Swami, today. We aren't able to see your video, so whenever you're ready, please switch on your camera. And the topic for today that Krishna Kshetra Swami will be presenting is the map is not the territory, mapping hermeneutic approaches to the Bhagavatam's cosmologies. So please go for it. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Kunal, and my thanks to all of you who have been organizing this course. I think it's a wonderful initiative of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. Let's see if I can share my screen. I think so. Let's see. Sharing screen, share. How is that? Okay. And we'll do full screen. There we go. Okay, this is going to be basically what I spoke at a conference at Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies some months ago, but this is for those of you who were not present for that. So indeed, the map is not the territory, is my topic, and mapping hermeneutic approaches to the Bhagavatam's cosmology is the more specific intention. So I start with a quote from the Bhagavatam, the 5th canto. This is from chapter 16. Verse 21, the mud on both banks of the river Jambu Nadi, being moistened by the flowing juice and then dried by the air and the sunshine, produces huge quantities of gold called Jambu Nada. The denizens of heaven use this gold for various kinds of ornaments. Therefore, all the inhabitants of the heavenly planets and their youthful wives are fully decorated with golden helmets, bangles, and belts, and thus they enjoy life. Well, that's very nice. We hear this description, but what do we understand from it? And so I want to bring in this rather famous phrase from Polish-American philosopher of the 20th century, Alfred Korzybski. And I think this little diagram gives the basic idea of what he's saying. We start perhaps on the left with reality as such. We perceive it with our senses, which have constraints, and we understand are imperfect. From that, we get some understanding, and from that, there are filters, and then all of this might be articulated in some form or another, and we can call it a graph, a map, broadly speaking. So 2 questions I'm wanting to address. What is the relation between the Bhagavata's descriptions in written form, that is, linguistic representations, and the actualities out there that the text describes? It tells us that these are actualities somewhere in the universe. But another question is, what is the relation of attempts at mapping hermeneutical, that is, interpretive approaches to the first question, to any actual interpretive practices, or to the conceptualizing of such interpretive practices? So this is a kind of second order reflection on what the process of interpretation is all about. Hermeneutics 108. Of course, I'm speaking about Western hermeneutics here. And a short definition, hermeneutics is the art of practice of interpretation. Okay. We have a list here of 5 prominent Western philosophers of hermeneutics. I think all of them are German except one French, Paul Ricoeur. And my interest goes specifically and especially to the work of Hans-Georg Gadamer. He creates or he establishes a philosophical framework that recognizes complexity of interpretation and of understanding. And more specifically, he's interested in the notion of dialogue, and he wants interpretation to be a reflexive process, which means reflecting on oneself as one is engaged in the process. And he wants to acknowledge the role of our biases and the traditions with which we come to any interpretation, especially of a text, and usually of a religious text. He wants to do this while seeking to bridge the gap between, well, he calls them horizons, our horizon and the horizon of others. To explain all of this, he writes extensively, and of course, there's no time here to elaborate. But I want to suggest 3 general categories, which Gadamer talks about, 3 types of hermeneutics. Broadly speaking, there's the hermeneutics of consent, there's the hermeneutics of suspicion, and what Gadamer calls integrative hermeneutics. And I want to unpack these briefly. And we'll start with the Bhagavata's hermeneutics of consent. And as an example of this, I'm taking a quote from a very traditional acharya of the Madhva Sampradaya, Vijayadvaja. So, the words of Vyasa, an ocean of infinite wisdom, cannot be doubted. And according to him, quote, details regarding the world, the earth's sheaths, should be taken as per the Bhagavatam. Any other text, in case of contradiction, should be reconciled as required. So that's, you can say, consenting to the statements of Shastra. He goes on to say, and this is in response to a verse which comes 1 or 2 verses earlier in the passage that I was reading, where it says that these jambu fruits are the size of elephants. So now he wants to explain the size of an elephant is meant to perceive the fullness and not actual dimension. So we may breathe easily. We may think, oh, okay, so it's figurative. But then he goes on to say the actual size is mentioned in the Vayu Purana as, quote, sages who directly and truly perceive entities, that is, Rishibi Tattva Darshibi, have told the fruit to be 861 aratnis. What's an aratni? It's the distance from the elbow to the fingertip in size. Multiplied by 861, and you have something like 4 football field lengths. Okay, elephants that size. That's what the acharyas say. That's what the Vayu Purana says. Right. Well, this sounds like a kind of literalism in the Bhagavatam. And one might be concerned that this is what's called in philosophy naive realism. Well, but you can say, anyway, it's poetry. It's all written in poetic language. But the claim could be made from a consent, hermeneutics of consent position, that, well, what we're saying here is that the map is the territory. Well, there are examples of multiple interpretations in the Bhagavatam. I would point out Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Vaishnav Toshni commentary on the 10th canto. I would also point out Bhaktivinoda Thakur's allegorical interpretations of Krishna's childhood demon-killing leelas, but he does not deny their literal meaning. He adds the allegorical meaning. Okay, then we can look at Richard Thompson's acknowledgement in his book, The Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. There are multiple versions and variations of cosmology and cosmography in the various Puranas, in the Mahabharata, and in Jain and Buddhist texts. He acknowledges this. So we may say, okay, traditional Shastric hermeneutics to the rescue. In the Vedanta Sutra, the Brahma Sutra, Tatu Samanvayat, Lord Krishna is the conclusion because of the totality of all scriptural statements. And so we might go back to Gadamer in his process of interpretation and see how we're reading, interpreting, reading further, interpreting, continuing this process of part and whole analysis. This may bring us to some understanding. And if we take it that, yes, we're putting Krishna in the center of the circle of hermeneutic interpretation, or we're putting him across the horizon, and thus we come to a proper understanding, possibly. Well, let's move on now to the hermeneutics of suspicion. This was coined by Paul Ricoeur. The famous three masters of suspicion, Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, are well-known figures. And the basic idea of hermeneutics of suspicion is that the straightforward meanings of texts is regarded as deceptive or self-deceptive. Explicit texts hide deeper meanings and implications. And this especially is understood to boil down to establishing and maintaining power over and oppression of others. Well, how this might be applied, the hermeneutics of suspicion, I take an excerpt from Patanjali Yoga Sutras, where is described in the third pada the process of samyama and the results. So, for example, we have these three statements: Bhuvana Jnanam Surye Samyamat. By performing samyama on the sun, arises knowledge of the different realms in the universe. And similarly, samyama on the moon, knowledge of the solar systems. Samyama on the pole star, knowledge of movements of stars. Okay, here comes the suspicions. Well, yogic powers may be a hook to entice adherents. Part of a cynical marketing scheme for yoga. Yoga offers the promise of power to the powerless. Or there may be a psychological explanation. Yoga powers are an expression of infantile powerlessness, overcoming repressed childhood experiences of powerlessness. and so many more explanations could be suggested. Moving quickly on, we go up to integrative hermeneutics. And here we can consider some of the ideas of Richard Thompson, again in his book, Mysteries of the Sacred Universe. His efforts at mapping the Bhagavatam's fifth canto onto contemporary geographic and cosmographic accounts. And in particular, his notion of the context-sensitive models. He says, in the Bhagavatam, the context-sensitive approach was rendered particularly appropriate by the conviction that reality and the ultimate issue is avak manasam, or beyond the reach of the mundane mind or words. This implies that a literal one-to-one model of reality is unattainable. And so one may as well pack as much meaning as possible into a necessarily incomplete description of the universe. And so in this way, I would say Richard Thompson's affirming this notion that the map is not the territory applies to the Bhagavatam. It is necessarily incomplete, he says. Okay. So he acknowledges figurative language. He uses quotation marks around these two terms, islands and oceans, in referring to the rings of Bhumandala. And so he says the geography of Bhumandala encodes a combination of astronomical and geographical maps, which is both rational and scientific. And he says it appears that this geography is introduced or adapted to convey a number of meaningful messages, some of which may still remain obscure. And this process may be linked to, says Richard Thompson, the historical development of Purana cosmology. Again, we have three hermeneutics styles: hermeneutics of consent, of suspicion, and integrative hermeneutics. There's a fourth option, which I want to share, I want to suggest, extending integrative hermeneutics. And this is the thinking of Dr. Jessica Frazier, who is a lecturer in theology and religion at Trinity College, Oxford. And she suggests, and it's interesting, by the way, she wrote her doctoral dissertation on Gadamer and Rupa Goswami. She got them speaking to each other, so to say. She suggests, rather than dialogue, which was Gadamer's idea, between two supposedly disparate worldviews, what may be called for is what she calls triangulation of multiple voices, what she calls choral hermeneutics. Now, we want to apply this, I want to suggest, to interpreting the Bhagavatam. And I've suggested here with this simple diagram that we may have four sorts of orientations that we need to take into account in interpreting the Bhagavatam, including interpreting about jambu fruits falling and becoming gold mixed with water of juice and mud and so on. And it gets more complicated when we add the particulars, the specifics of non-Indic traditions, of our current readers, and of course, our Vedic corpus and the commentarial tradition, or one should perhaps say commentarial traditions. So just to kind of bring this together briefly, I'm suggesting that at least using Western thought about hermeneutics, we consider this idea that the map is not the territory. There is the hermeneutics of consent, but what did this hermeneutics of consent lead us to? To picture jambu fruits, which are the size of 4 football fields. The hermeneutics of suspicion is there, and I want to point out the Bhagavatam also uses the hermeneutics of suspicion, applying it to materialistic worldviews. And then we have integrative hermeneutics of Richard Thompson's analysis in the mysteries of the sacred universe. What Jessica Fraser calls choral hermeneutics may also be something we need to consider as an option if we're going to do comprehensive hermeneutics of the Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada said in his commentary to the verse which I quoted, "It is understood that in a higher planetary system in this material world, the mud on the banks of the Jambu Nadi mixes with jambu juice, reacts with the sunshine in the air, and automatically produces huge quantities of gold." To me, that leaves many questions unanswered. It is understood by whom and how. So this leaves me with questions, and I hope it leaves you with some thoughts on the subject of hermeneutics of the Bhagavatam. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much, Krishna Kshetra Swami, for that fantastic talk. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to take questions, but there may be some in the Q&A box which you may be able to address by hand there. Okay, so maybe while we are switching to the next speaker, I just ask you maybe in one sentence, if you were to summarize what is really the solution here. How do we understand the Bhagavatam's cosmology? Do we need to take up the yogic powers in order to understand it thoroughly, or do you think there are other means? And in the meantime, I will request Leela to please, or Arya, who is working behind the scenes here, to start showing a video of Akhandi Das. But yes, please, Krishna Kshetra Maharaj, if you have any final, like, one sentence summary of resolving the issue with Bhagavatam's cosmology.
You want me to respond?
If there is a one sentence description, yeah.
My one sentence is simply, I think we need to recognize that there's a range of ways to approach the issue. And we should be careful not to artificially limit our ways of approaching the issue. That's my one sentence reply.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to show a video at this stage. Our next speaker is supposed to be Akhandi Das, who couldn't be here today because he's on a tour of various museums at the moment. He's actively working for the Science Museum of the Vedic Planetarium, something that you will hear tomorrow. And his topic for today is consciousness-based life and speciation. He has taken an effort to actually send a recording of his talk. So he did that late at night yesterday. So thank you very much, Akhandi. By means of introduction, Akhandi is very well known for his series on Atma Paradigm, which is up on YouTube, by the way. which is a synthesis of philosophy and science. He is a director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies and also of the Science and Philosophy Initiative. So let's watch this very interesting talk on consciousness-based life and the appearance of species.
Back to Delhi, having been on a field trip on behalf of the Science Museum of the Vedic Planetarium, which we're going to hear more about tomorrow. But let me start with a little exploration of the aspect of life, the appearance of species, as we want to frame it within the Science Museum. We raise the question, what is life? What's it all about? And there are lots of definitions for life. According to the BBC recently, they are all wrong because it's very difficult to describe all the something that covers all aspects of life. But generally, here's a reasonable effort. The condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. Now you'll notice that basically says the condition that distinguishes animals from plants and animals and plants from inorganic matter, but it just describes why, because they seem to have certain capacities. In other words, life is what living things do. They grow, they maintain, they reproduce, etc., before they die. But we want to extend that understanding. And already we've explored the idea that consciousness is not likely to be a product of the brain and body. Rather, consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality. It's the nature. We have said that there needs to be a separate source of consciousness, which we regard as the Atma. We explained all that last week for the rationale. Now we quickly look at consciousness in other species. I will be whizzing through some very deep, interesting topics during this session. I'm doing so because in this summer school, we want to give a flavor rather than we're trying to go deep. So I'm covering a lot of ground in this. Let's look at consciousness in other species. Animals think, they use language. No one's saying that language is actually a requirement to think, and there's evidence on that from stroke victims. They have self-recognition, at least within certain animals, primates, some corvids, crows, and elephants have been shown to be able to recognize themselves in a mirror. Some understand theory of mind, which means that they understand that other people or animals or things will think differently to how they do about things. They can be creative and artistic. They can even be psychic. This is the example of Nikisi, an African grey parrot. And the big question is, do they experience qualia? Because we made that the experience of qualitative perceptions, we made that the hallmark that distinguished non-neural mind and consciousness from matter. And yes, they obviously have great sensory activities, but do they experience qualia? How would we test that? It's not an easy thing, as we said last week. Qualia are ineffable. The one to work on, unfortunately for the poor animals, is the experience of pain. Do they have a subjective experience of an ow, something that feels hurtful from an activity, from damage to them? Is it simply a response, or is it a felt feeling? And the Queen's University in Belfast did their analysis, and they showed that animals respond to pain differently from ordinary stimuli. There's a change of behavior and a change of motivation and decision making, and particularly these involve making choices which threaten their survival. So if survival is the key kind of meant to be instinct spoken of for animals, then it seems that the felt experience of pain will override that. And some of them are able to generate analgesics, pain relief, even within their own bodies. And that comes at a physical cost. So therefore, it seems to be anti-survival. But stopping pain is more important to these creatures than survival. Hence, the conclusion is crustaceans, in this case they were studying lobsters, and subjectively feel the qualia of pain, as do other vertebrates like ourselves. And creatures undergo non-neural phenomenal experience, therefore we have to presume the presence of a source of consciousness. And we can extend this even to the plant world. We won't get into the details, but there's a lot of work now on the nature of consciousness and communication and feelings and even emotions and sensing emotions that seem to be present within the plant world. So we would like to extend this understanding to link consciousness and life. It's amazing that in general biology, life is considered one thing. It's a special chemical process, which living things seem to do. And consciousness is just something that appears in some of them. But actually what our proposition is that consciousness seems to be present in all creatures, and actually perhaps life is the interplay of the Atma, the entity of consciousness, the source of consciousness, and a biological body. This approach to life really changes the nature of how all things work. And it gives us a different way of regarding what we call biology and our connection with other life forms. And it starts to question what we know about the appearance of life and the appearance of many species. Let us ask, what drives life? Is it survival and reproductive instinct? That seems to be the standard approach when you regard animals as just biological things which have emerged out of inorganic matter. Then what is ascribed to them is simply instincts and responses trying to help them survive and have a reproductive instinct. Now, there's no explanation why they should have those instincts. That's a different matter. And really, we would suggest that that sort of description of the animal world is really poor and doesn't match what we see creatures getting up to. They seem to want to have fun. So we would suggest that there is three main factors at play within the animal species. They want to exist. They want to understand what's going on. They're curious to know what's going on. And they seem to want to enjoy stuff. They want to be happy and comfortable and have a good life. And what it seems to be is that if our proposition of the Atma as the source of consciousness within any species, if that is correct, then maybe the qualities which are inherent in the Atma, Sat, Chit, Ananda, these aspects of existence and knowledge and pleasure, maybe these inherent qualities in the Atma start to feed through even in the conditioned state where the Atma is present in a covered form, in the body of a lower, what we would call a lower species or animal. The Vedas do give a hierarchy to the levels of consciousness and embodied consciousness, and regard plants and non-moving entities at one level, aquatics at another, insects, and then vertebrates, mammals, and so on at a higher level, coming up in the amount of consciousness that they're able to exist and to express. And what level of consciousness they're able to express really will start to manifest in how much they want to live, how much they want to understand and know their environment and how to get what they want, and how much they get to enjoy, perhaps connect with other creatures and have a social or family life. And in order to do all these things, there is a fourth element, the Vigraha. They need a body. So when the Atma wants to be, to know, and to enjoy in this world, it requires a Vigraha in order to do the things to fulfill the above objectives. I think this gives a broader and more satisfying understanding of the motivation behind animal behavior, and it will help those who are working in that field. So we ask, what is an organism? Well, first and foremost, it's an accommodation of consciousness. And what is it about consciousness that it's trying to accommodate? Two aspects. Experience for consciousness. The Atma wants to experience stuff. This is the whole principle behind the universe, the seer, consciousness, and the seen, the material world. And we want to experience. And we want to adjust our experience so there is agency. The agency is to do stuff so that our experiences are of, give us the best results of enjoyment and satisfaction and survival. So two things are being expressed by consciousness, experience and agency. And that manifests in the need for the Vigraha, the body. And ultimately, the body is composed of elements that will provide for experience. And those are the perception senses, the Gyanendriya. And they are the faculties for seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And agency is fulfilled through the Karmendriya facilities, the action faculties for communicating, manipulating, reproducing, evacuating, and transport or movement. So ultimately, we can see that the drive of consciousness for experience and agency requires these 10 faculties, and all of them are grouped around the mind. So consciousness allows its experience and agency to manifest within the mind, to manipulate our perception senses, to gather information about the world, and to manipulate our action faculties to help us move about, do things, eat things, speak to things, and thereby engage and get the experiences we want. That is basically the Vedic understanding of what is an organism. So this gives us a definition. And the definition of a living thing is a biological, or a living organism in biological terms, is a biological structure accommodating the experience and agency of consciousness through a specific set of perception senses and action faculties. And all of that is gathered around the mind. So this actually questions, well, we're making consciousness central to the biological processes. Is there evidence of this? And actually there is, and there's a huge change in the way many biologists regard the work that they're doing on cells and the body as a whole. And I want to compare two systems, and I can only do this very quickly in the time available to me today. The central dogma, and that sounds derogatory, but it's actually the official term coined by Francis Crick in the 1950s, has certain tenets, certain beliefs and commitments that it is built on. And systems biology is a new look, and it questions the assumptions of the central dogma. We have long been told that DNA, our genes, control cell behavior, that the cell does what DNA tells it to do. The systems biology says, actually, that's not what the evidence shows. The evidence, it seems, that the cells utilize DNA in order to fulfill its purposes. And the reason this change has come about is because of epigenetics, where it seems that what the cell is using isn't just a fixed part of the DNA that is activated, but it is picking and choosing bits of the DNA strand from here, there, weaving those together, switching on some other genes that it could have used, and switching off or on some other ones. And it's basically picking and choosing. And where is the information to make that picking and choosing? It's not from the DNA itself. It seems to be coming from the cell. So the cell is using the genetic code, not as something that is telling it what to do, but the genetic code is like a library. It's like going into the library and picking the books and the information that you want, going to the websites that you want to get information for, and weaving that together as your dissertation. So cells control the use of DNA, not the other way around. It said that DNA repairs itself if mutations occur. Actually, it is the cell that sends the enzymes around the DNA to heal them and to correct them if it senses mutations. The cell is watching out for its own DNA. Psychological, in the central dogma, psychological traits cannot be passed on. You know, only the gene gets passed on. Now it seems that psychological traits can be passed on. That means that attitudes developed within the mind of ourselves or other creatures can actually influence the results and morphological results of offspring. And we've always assumed that the DNA defines our morphology, the form of the body. But no one can find anything within DNA that says what a body will look like in total. Yes, if you knock out one gene or another, you might make it more difficult for that body to produce the limbs as it would like to. But that doesn't mean that DNA gene determined the shape of a particular part of the body. There's two different things, and they should not be misunderstood. The DNA does not define morphology. So there's a new field of top-down biology, and it looks at the situation of the genes and sees how they're being manipulated and used as information to fulfill the purposes of the cell. And the cell seems to be acting in such a way that it is fulfilling the purpose of the particular tissue, the type of cell, and forming that material, a particular type of material, which could be skin tissue, it could be blood cells, it could be brain cells, whatever it is, the 200 different types of cells and that make up the tissue and different parts of the substances that we need within our body. Cells seem to be changing themselves, organizing themselves to form the right type of tissue. And the tissue seems to be forming because of the need to create particular organs. Say like muscles, particular type of muscles required for the heart. And the heart is an organ which only works because it is trying to fulfill a function within a system to pump blood. Creating a pump without understanding the pipes work, the plumbing work that needs to come from it to send blood all around the body and to purify it at different points. That's the system. The organ isn't required, but it seems to be fulfilling a purpose of the system. And all the systems, the blood and the skeletal and the muscles system, you know, all of the lymphatic systems, all of these are coming together in order to fulfill the purpose of the organism. So then the question is, where does the organism, what is it trying to fulfill? And the materialist point of view will suggest that the organism is simply is something that is responding to its environment. But really, that does not address the question, because how can the requirement of the environment actually be anything that is very specific in the organization of the biology, the happening within the body of a particular organism? And really, when you say about responding to the environment, what is it that's responding to the environment? It is the Atma. It is the conscious entity saying, I feel warm, I need to adjust my circumstance and behavior. I am under this pressure for food. I need to process this food instead of that food. It is the Atma that is ultimately driving the requirement of the organism, which in turn is the requirement of the systems, of the organs, of the tissue, of the cells, and how the cells use the genes. Top-down biology, starting from consciousness. So it fits in with this system that we showed last week, where we have the consciousness functions of the Atma and Chittam representing its expression both of perception and also expression of volition, which manifests within the mind, the cognitive functions of the mind, as intention. And that information within the mind is then transferred down and modifies the biological states of the body and the brain complex. And if you change the input of Chittam, you change the output within the body. So we know now that there is very close connection between mind and physical health. There's known kind of cases of psychogenesis, which are psychological factors that cause and influence physical disease. Psychological factors have extra biological effect. For instance, like a placebo. Placebo has no chemical entity within it, so it's not able to influence the chemistry of the body, but somehow or other taking a placebo does create chemical changes. It can even influence the release of analgesic chemicals within the brain. So the psychological factors can change how we coordinate internal biological processes within us. They even have a morphological influence. And these are the listed cases of morphological influence from a mental state. Hypnosis can create a morphological effect on the body. Maternal impressions, heavy-duty trauma or experiences when a mother is pregnant have been shown to pass to their unborn baby. Remote viewing is a particular case where one can experience morphological change from extra sensory perception. Reincarnation cases are often quoted. This is the particular one, T2 Singh. It's one of Ian Stevenson's examples. He remembers being shot by a bullet in his previous life, and that's what killed him. And it turns out when you actually they were able to track down the individual that he believed he was. I think it was Ashok Verma was the killed Suresh Verma, sorry, Suresh Verma, who he believed he was, and they were able to match the gun wound that Suresh suffered with the actual birthmark on T2 Singh. So it seems that phenotype features, the body, can be modified by psychological interests. And this leads us to understanding the role of the mind and the subtle body in a different way. The mind, and I'm using mind in a very generalized sense, and I'm equating it with the role of the subtle body, which is more general and actually has more components to it than just mind. But this mind and subtle body is a malleable, subtle organ resting within the body. It is shaped by its mental, psychological content and information. It influences the top-down system within the body. It coordinates the development of the organism. And it holds morphological information not found in the DNA. Morphological information means that it contains the blueprint of the form of the body. So it acts as a template for the features of the physical body. So in this case, we can show that if this postulation is correct, this could be an explanation for several very important things which are yet mysteries into the world of biology. One is cell differentiation. The fact that when there is fertilization of the egg. It will then split into 2, into 4, into 8, into 16. And at that stage, all the cells are identical. They're clones of each other. But after that point, they start to wish to specialize. And there are various attempts to explain in purely mechanistic ways why they choose to form different things. And no one is at all satisfied, despite what the textbooks will tell you about protein gradients. No one believes that they've actually got a reasonable explanation for the precision in which the cells divide and organize themselves in a particular order. And this then feeds into the next stage of embryogenesis, that these cells start to form into the shape of a particular body, with the limbs and the organs that are needed for the different parts of the body starting to find their place and starting to specialize as the tissues in order to form the organs, in order to link with the systems, and so on, as we said earlier. So there is no current explanation of why that happens in the way it does. What is driving this process? Where is the morphology coming from? And it also can explain certain aspects of adaptation, which we shall come to, like these. The Alaskan stickleback, just because of a change of diet, it has been able to change its way of acting and behaving, and within the lifetime of a stickleback, change its morphology and its internal systems. The blue mussels are another example. When they are in proximity to an invasive species like the Asian shore crab, they have changed the use of their DNA in order to strengthen their muscle, their shell defenses. This is adaptation within a lifetime, not because of mutations, but the psychology, the desire of the living organism, the atma within the muscle to survive, to protect itself, is creating a change of use of its DNA within the cells, which is changing its own physical features within a lifetime. This cannot be compared or used as evidence within a kind of Darwinian style understanding or presentation of evolution. Another example how intent drives adaptation is the E. coli bacteria, which is one of the simplest forms. And they've done experiments where on the top right, they showed where they removed the gene that produces the flagella, the little curly movement parts at the end. And yes, when you remove the gene that produces the flagella, you get an E. coli molecule that doesn't have flagella, but it needs one. It has to be able to move. And what they found is that bacterium, that little critter on its own, one of the simplest entities around, grows a flagella. Not as perfect as it could have had with the other gene, but it finds another genetic pathway using another set of genes within its DNA in order to create enzymes which are different to the ones it would have produced, in order to that seem to be able to specify, let's make some of these flagella items and put them where we need them. So it's an example of intent driving adaptation. So as well as these aspects of differentiation, embryogenesis, and adaptation, speciation. That would be the logical next thing to postulate. If the Atma can do so much within the body within one lifetime, is it that the Atma is responsible for the appearance of different species? And that's what we're going to look at now. First of all, we consider what is a species. There are lots of different ways of trying to classify all the different life forms, not just animals like these, but all the other types that you would get. There's biological ways, there's morphological, genetic, mating, phylogenetic. I'm not getting into all the details. But Our definition is that a species is a population of organisms with a common particularized set of perceptual and action faculties, i.e. those 10 Gyanendriyas and Karmendriyas together have a particular facility in them, a way of experiencing stuff and a way of doing stuff. So each species has a particular type of 10 senses that enables it to experience stuff and do something different from another type of species. So these are and they provide them unique psychological expression and experience. So we have this picture that we drew previously. Consciousness gains experience and agency through the perception senses and action faculties. And in one sense, you can start to organize these in a particular way within the mind. And this is starting to form the subtle template for a body. And this one is, oh, where's it gone? Where's my tiger gone? Oh, missing. Oh, here it is. And it sort of starts to manifest the tiger. Let me go back. So what we're suggesting is that all the Atmas together, their interests have been looked at, gathered, analyzed within the Virat Rupa. And within the Virat Rupa is the Virat Rupa is basically the aggregation of all of the desires, the karma, the aspirations of every Atma in this universe. And it's all analyzed. And basically from all of that comes a picture that there needs to be 8.4 million different types of species that will fulfill all of these different desires for experience and agency. So that becomes the aggregated mind. So from all of that, then there is the production, as we know from mind, that information enters the psychophysical substrate and forms a whole batch of species templates, mental templates of all the species as we just shown, a set of data. And it's a bit like in your computer, if you want to kind of print out a document or something, it has a whole bunch of templates that you can choose. Do you want a letter? Do you want a menu? Do you want a dissertation or an invitation? Whatever you want. There's different templates already worked out, and you just have to activate them, and they can kind of come to life for you. So the aggregated mind of all Atmas has produced a set of subtle templates for each species, which are stored in the psychophysical substrate. And really, when one individual wants to manifest a population of species, and that individual would not be you or me, but it is designated as the role of a Prajapati, a level of consciousness in which they are able to activate within the mind the sense of, in this case, a tiger. And through meditation on the specific species, that activates the template, the little tiger species template, and that allows the generation of species population. I have given a very, very rough, quick overview of this, and I'm not doing justice to the level of detail and analysis that we can do both on the metaphysics of this and in, you know, the overall justification. But I need to move just to explain that when you've got this tiger template, this is where our population of tigers come from. All matter is a manifestation of information. We've already established that. Consciousness generates information. That information generates the forms of matter. Species are no different. We know that there is subtle mystic processes through the cities that can manifest matter from the intention. The species are just an advanced version of that. So we have the system that we would call the punctuated generation of species. From the species template actually manifests crown variants, particular versions of that type, which fit the template, but which may be specific to time, place, and circumstance. And from there, there will be radiations over generations. So each crown variant gives rise to adaptive radiations of devolved subvariants. All of these are devolved from the original. They are not new species in themselves. They are simply variants of the one type of species from the template. So just to wrap up now, and within these last few minutes, what we call, most of what is presented as evidence for evolution is an analysis of microevolution. Microevolution is adaptation within a species. So let's just be clear on what we're not attacking here and what we're questioning. So species do adapt over time and generations. We've just said that. They produce variants in a devolved way. So any adaptation is always within a species. It does not, there's no evidence of new species from this. Natural selection happens. It's an obvious, simple thing, but it is not a source of specifying new species. It simply helps in the variety of what happens within a population in the current time. And natural selection is rather whimsical. So what can favor one species now can actually be a disadvantage in a little time when there's a change of environment and so on. The breeding of animals and plants is an example of natural selection done by humans, if you like. So it's the unnatural man-made selection. And of course it works, but the effects are reversible. You see that within breeding of plants and different, pigeons or whatever you want to work with. The effects are reversible. No new species. There's always a limitation to breeding. Mutations, of course, mutations occur. That's unfortunate because most of the time it's rare in nature. Man-made activities probably has accelerated them. They're pretty well always negative, and they're certainly not useful for explaining speciation. And there's homology, i.e. there's a similar use of skeletal structures and systems within the body. And that's understandable in terms that the template is providing for the 5 perceptive centers and the 5 working faculties. Those are standard to all creatures. You can see them. Some of them have more aspects manifest in this way or that, and others do not, they may not seem to have something very strong, but it's always there in potential. And species, yep, people say they go extinct, no problem. They appear over ages, things happen. Yeah, we agree. There is sequential appearance of the species. This is explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Vishnu Puran gets even more detailed about it and says you need the foundational species first to set the scene, the ecology for then the animals, and then later on you get the humans. It explains that that's a natural process. So conclusions on this: adaptation, microevolution is adaptation within the limits of a species. That's observed, it's confirmed. But it is not evidence of macroevolution and should not be extended and extrapolated in this way as the transition from one species to a new one. And all the evidence that is quoted for Darwinian evolution is evidence of microevolution trying to be extended. Natural selection, mutations occur, but they're not sufficient in themselves. They're not effective enough to produce the changes of one species to another. So I just want to finish with the comparison of evolution and this idea of punctuated appearance. And we're just using this chart. And unfortunately, I won't have time now to go through it in much detail. But if we look at the how punctuated generation fares against evolutionary theory in matching known facts about biology. The green is a good match. The red is either it doesn't match or that there's problems to it. For instance, there's issues with abiogenesis. That's a problem for the evolutionary theory. It is not required. There is no abiogenesis needed in the understanding of punctuated generation. Species undergo variation, no problem. They use DNA. That's green, green across. Homologous, no problem. We just said natural selection favors reproductive, no problem. We're not arguing on those. Those are facts. But they apply as equally to the punctuated, if not more so, than they do to the evolution. Because natural selection limits gene pool. We know that it helps the devolvement of the gene pool rather than the expansion of it. Random mutations, not useful. No direct evidence of macroevolution. That's a problem for red for evolution. It's not effective. It's not part of the punctuated theory. There's evidence only of microevolution. Speciation events happen abruptly. That is what the analysis, there's, I can't get into the details explaining that. Check out the ATMA paradigm. Changes that do occur seem to, from adaptation, tend to be minor and reversible. And organisms can adapt their bodies within a lifetime. It's not something that happens in this gradual process, Darwinian process over generations. We can see that it can actually happen within one lifetime when the ATMA is responding to its environment. And then there's paleontological evidence. There's variation from simple to complex. Technically, we're letting that be green in both sides. But actually, there's no such thing as a simple entity. Every entity is a set of 10 functions. So it's never simple. It's always specified according to the 10 senses that it needs. Major lines appear suddenly. This is the fossil evidence and problem on the evolution side. But it is what you would expect through the punctuated understanding. There are no transitional species. You don't need them for the punctuated, but it's a problem to evaluate or validate evolution. No identifiable links between groups of species. Stasis, many species maintain the original form over hundreds of millions of years. Complex features appear in unrelated lines. This is said to be convergent evolution, but there's no mechanism for convergent evolution. And we're talking about different sets of genes using different genetic mechanisms in order to produce a different form of photosensitive cell that can be used as an eye in different types of beings. And symbiotic species seem to appear together, which is interesting. So final wrap up, the summary of our metaphysical framework. There's no requirement for abiogenesis. Physical bodies are designed to accommodate the aspirations of consciousness. That is our definition. A species is defined by faculties for sensory experience and expression of volitional agency. And the templates for all species types exist within the psychophysical substrate. Populations of each species are generated from these templates according to time, place, and circumstance. Many devotees think that all the species exist eternally forever. The templates exist eternally forever within the psychophysical substrate. They are productions within the Virat Rupa at the beginning of the universe. But it's not that the individual populations of species that can be produced from that are necessarily all there from the beginning. And on this planet, it does seem from the Bhagavatam and Purana statements that they are manifest in different places according to time, place, and circumstances over the ages. And this proposition matches biological and paleontological evidence. Therefore, even Darwin said, if you've got a better idea than mine, does it match the evidence? And what we have seen is that actually this theory matches the evidence better than his own. And I think he, as a serious thinker and scientist, would therefore have to say, okay, we'll have to give this a go. So I'm afraid I'm not available for questions today, but thank you for watching this video, and I hope to join you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.
All right, we will have to move on. And our next set of speakers is Dr. Venugopal Damarla and Dr. Uma Pallavi. So they're going to be talking about chanting Mahamantra meditation research and spiritual intelligence. So I'm going to request Dr. Damarla and Dr. Uma Pallavi to please switch on their cameras. And while I introduce them, maybe start sharing your screen. I believe Dr. Damarla is going first. And Dr. Venugopal Damarla, who is also known as Gopinath Das, is a staff physician at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in San Antonio and a senior clinical fellow at Mays Cancer Center at the University of Texas, San Antonio. He is also the founding director of the Prabhupada Research Institute for Integrative Medicine. And Dr. Uma Pallavi, who is also known as Ujjwala Radhe Devidasi, has a master's in psychology and is currently pursuing a PhD at the Indian Knowledge Systems and Mental Health Division at IIT Mandi. So thank you very much for being our speakers today. And you may start sharing your screen.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see it very well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gopinath Das, Venugopal Damarla. I am a staff physician, Department of Medical Oncology here in San Antonio, Texas, at the Departments of Veterans Affairs. Very nice, thank you. I'm very grateful for the BI faculty and board members for having me. Actually, I feel that this is a great forum. I would congratulate especially Rajesh Prabhu to have organized this. This is so important. I've been waiting for many decades to see something like this happen, and it's happening. That's fantastic. So first thing, many people are trying these days to meditate more from the heart. If you just see, these days, because there is knowledge that the intention to create health needs to be strengthened first, and that starts from the heart. And so, there's a lot of talk and research going on heart-centered meditation and such. So in our institute, we actually have undertaken this effort roughly about 9 or 10 years ago, officially. So this has been my dream since I met the devotees more than 30 years ago, and actually very grateful to Srila Prabhupada for having me, inspired me to do this work. So a heart-centered, audible, can audible meditation, like what Srila Prabhupada taught us, be a gateway to facilitate the spirit to help create mental and physical well-being. So mental and physical well-being are, inseparable from a state of mental balance. So we actually have our research basically focuses on influence of easily learned Mahamantra Japa, or chanting meditation on the heart and brain. So, and our current findings so far, they point in the direction that trained attention to audible repetition of Mahamantra or sounds with spiritual connection are like passwords which inherently induce um, positive emotions and intentions. So, and I would just like to just give an insight of what Srila Prabhupada always saw science as part of knowledge which is coming from Krishna. So, so Prabhupada says any knowledge you accept is Veda as long if it's uplifting, then you can call it as Vedic knowledge. So we don't see modern science like separate from Vedic knowledge. As a person who's rigorously trained in the scientific method, I would definitely see the positives of science and how science can be used to experience Krishna consciousness with objectivism. So so the overview of my talk would be understanding health and its connection to sound and mantra, and some mechanisms which underpin the action of the audible mantra meditation. So there are three key points. That the anatomical organization of the body consists of very specific facts. One of them is the auditory nerve, which is common to hearing and equilibrium. The second is the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve, supplies the inner ear and connects heart to the brain. And the third is neuroscientists have postulated that the heart is just not a pump; it's a thinking organ. Because we know, as from our Bhagavata understanding, that the heart is the seat of consciousness and the Paramatma. So actually, if you just see, Srila Prabhupada is saying in the second chapter, one of his purports, translations to the verses in the second chapter, that the individual atomic soul is definitely there in the heart along with the super soul, and thus all energies of bodily movement are emanating from this part of the body. So the corpuscles, the red cell corpuscles, which carry the oxygen from lungs, gather energy from the soul. These are the literal words of Srila Prabhupada. He gives special importance to the region of the heart. And also Lord Krishna himself is saying in many verses that I am situated, sarvasya chaham siddhi sannivishtam. But there are many verses, I don't want to go into the Sanskrit verses, but this is all actually very important for understanding research methodology. And also I'll speak lastly about the current research and evidence of health benefits with chanting. So we actually know that so the modern, lot of, despite modern advances and in the fields of diagnostic surgery and pharmaceuticals for acute health conditions, chronic lifestyle diseases are on the rise. We know that especially in the modern world, that depression, heart disease, obesity, stroke, cancer, arthritis, they're the most common and also very costly and preventable health problems. So the spiritually based interventions, like the easily learned ones like Mahamantra meditation, becomes all the more relevant to the modern health and well-being of the world. So the underlying principle of, as I know, is that things go from the internal to external. What it practically means is that the extent one is clean in his consciousness, the more healthy our consciousness is, it will manifest a strong, auspicious, and emotional and physical health. So this, in the modern scientific world, in the modern literature, we see that those who follow a spiritual religious path, they live longer, at least 13 years longer than people who don't have a spiritual path. And this is actually one which is published in a journal, in a heart journal. So what are the reasons? One of the reasons we can think of is people who have a spiritual path have a better capacity to self-regulation and probably higher willpower. They also have a higher a heart rate variability. That I'll come to what is heart rate variability in just a little bit. In just few slides, I'll be talking about that. And then people who with a spiritual path seem to have a unique capacity to manage their stress well. Although all of us have stress, how we manage it is very, very important. So, and positive emotions and intentions unlock the body's inbuilt pharmacy or intelligence. Our bodies all have inbuilt intelligence in them. So, like when I was watching, one of the surgeons was saying that the uniqueness, the surgeons only cut. You can cut a piece of leather, and you can cut a piece of, like a living body. A piece of leather never, even if you leave it, it'll always be gaping open. But if you leave, you cut a person and then you leave after 5-6 days, you see that it's actually healing. So that actually is a very simple understanding that the body has intelligence to heal. And Vedic understanding have taken into consideration all these things to connect spiritual practice and staying well. And the conceptual framework of Vedic understanding is the life is basically a combination of three factors. You have the body and the senses, you have the material and physical elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and then you have the subtle body, which is the mind, intelligence, and ego. The mind is an interface between matter and consciousness. It's an intermediate sense organ. And then you have the self or soul, which is pure consciousness. It is non-material and is located in the region of the heart. So as I said earlier, recent discoveries do reveal that heart sends more impulses to the brain than brain sends to the heart. As you see, we can understand that that the ancient healing science regards the phenomenal universe and the human system coming from sabda or sound. And we know that sound, according to the Bhagavata philosophy, the pranava sound Om is the platform for time and space. So so there are ways like repeating mantras, which when repeated audibly on a daily basis, they encode for actually physical and mental well-being. These mantras are capable of purging toxic thought patterns and unlock the body's inbuilt pharmacy. So in the Vedic perspective, health is not an absence of disease. Rather, it's the resultant state of being in the moment with a purpose, with an ability for empathy. It is the dynamic balance of psychophysiological and psychological and spiritual influences. So there are threefold modalities of prevention of chronic illness in the Ayurveda. And one of them very stands out that mantra meditation was integral part of routine because that helps balance bodily factors, the mind especially. And then you have the pursuit of self-discovery, which is a key to our inbuilt pharmacy. Somebody has a purpose, always a purpose. The pharmacy which is built actually is very active and giving us all the things we need to maintain our health. So the third thing is the food was seen as medicine, and apart from proper timely food, sleep, movement, and relaxation. So the choices for food also depends on a person's capacity for self-regulation. If somebody has better willpower, that person can eat on time, eat the right foods, and also eat with the right consciousness. So that because whatever we eat becomes actually raw material. So for the healing processes. So food is just not fuel. Food is also a language, which is which is conveyed. So the next aspect of Vedic understanding in health is the three gunas. So we have sattva, rajas, and tamas, and sattva is the creative, the maintenance mode. Rajas is the creative mode, and tamas is the destructive mode. So the daily practice, so we know that daily practice of Hare Krishna mantra, we can experience all these qualities. Even if you spend like half an hour of chanting, just like anyone can experiment for himself or herself, that you find a better sense of balance, harmony, positivity, peacefulness, clarity, and also lightness and creativity, openness. All these things come when we chant attentively. We can see that happening. And also a lot of people who do yoga and meditation, they're younger. Their physiological age is much younger than their biological age. And the reason, because it's probably you can apply one of the from some principles of physics, like in Einstein, that did state that as an object moves closer to light, there is time dilatation. So there is the effect of time actually reduces when you approach light, the velocity of light, you can say. So that means that if you cultivate sattva guna, and you're less likely to have a time affecting the body too much. So there is a better telomere repair, as better cell repair, better recovery. So, and also the second thing is the sound meditation, it actually diminishes excess of tamas and rajas. So do we have any well-accepted physiological measures, the surrogate measures for sattva guna? So we have this picture which shows what is heart rate variability. So the heart rate variability concept is our hearts which at normal resting rate, they're not beating at same constant monotonous way. The beat to beat intervals change on millisecond basis. And so it actually it expands and contracts, and it's dependent on how it's a language. It's almost like a Morse code going from the heart to the brain, and it actually regulates the way the heart is the brain is actually processing information which is coming from the heart. Here, I would like to also point out that this is an important pathway of the heart to brain communication, because there's if you have a very continuous orderly changes, if you just see the heart rhythms, if they are very very orderly, and it's actually it's conveyed to the brain. These orderly impulses, they create a favorable state of cognition in some brain areas. And I don't want to get into the technicalities, but heart rate variability, if you have a better heart rate variability, it is associated with stress resilience and physiological and psychological flexibility. If somebody has a low heart rate variability, like if our rhythms are very haphazard, like on the left side, it indicates many diseases, chronic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, depression, dementia, diabetes. So you can actually predict a person's susceptibility to a disease like diabetes 5 to 6 years before you actually find high sugars in the blood. But if that person has a bad heart rate variability, you can predict that the person has increased susceptibility for heart disease and diabetes.
Dr. Demala, I'd just like to remind that maybe we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes.
Yes, so here is so we have this this is an electron microscope microscope of the heart, where we see the neurons in the heart are very indistinguishable from that you find in the brain. So the brain has a very unique heart anatomical organization. Almost there seems to be a brain in the heart itself. So why is that? That is because probably we know from Vedic understanding that it is due to the presence of seat of consciousness, and it has to orchestrate a lot of things. So it's given, heart is given a special anatomical organization. This slide is very known to devotees. What is the mantra? I don't have to go into that. There are 3 stages of the mantra practice. And we know that mental and audible repetition of divine name stands beyond religious doctrines, dogma, or ritual. It is integral part of science of self-realization. We know that the repetition of sounds with spiritual connection, it leads to a higher level of awareness at individual level and an increase of sattva guna, or mode of goodness. So this is actually a study which was done by Dr. Wolf, Veera Govind Prabhu, about 20 years ago. And in that, he documented the effects of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra on psychosocial function. The study participants experienced an increase in sattva guna as measured by a standardized scale called Vedic Personality Questionnaire, as well as a decrease in rajas and tamas, which corresponded to relief of stress and depression. The effects persisted after 4 weeks of stopping the chanting practice, unlike what is seen with prescription medications. This is our study, which we published in 2018. So in this study, we saw that if you just see this, on the left side is before chanting, and on the right side is after chanting. In that, we see that we actually see the more orderly heart rhythms after just half an hour of chanting, which indicates improvement of healthy heart rate variability frequencies. So in the second study, we did another study starting in 2021 during actually the COVID pandemic. And in that, we actually refined the technique. We did a heart-focused audible chanting, concentrated hearing. We asked the participants to keep the hand close to the chest so that they can feel the reverberation of the mantra while they chanted the vibration. And we also had a placebo group who chanted a mantra similar to Maha Mantra in the terms of meter. And then we saw that in the mantra, there was better self-regulation, much, much higher than the placebo and control groups. This is another study we did on a cancer patients. In this brain cancer patient, we found indices of resilience increase by a significant extent. This is also another study which is done by Dr. Behra and his associates at IIT Mandi, where we see that the 6 weeks of mantra training actually increased the sleep efficiency, and which is pretty significant actually. This is the abstract. It is I am grateful to Chandan Kumar Behra for sharing this. So there in this, there is results showed that the Hare Krishna mantra significantly improved sleep quality measures, including a 61% reduction in efficiency in daytime sleepiness was decreased by 60%, and also there was increase in sleep efficiency. So some of the mechanisms, I don't want to get into the details, but the most important thing is attentive hearing of the mechanical audible repetition of sounds rooted in the Sanskrit improves proportion of sattva guna, which results in positive emotions generated in the heart. And that actually translates to brain centers interpreting this orderly organization of heart impulses, and you're capable of making better executive decisions. You have your higher willpower. So here, this is actually the same figure I showed you in the beginning. By chanting the repetitive audible Mahamantra chanting increases the distance from the mind. Actually, a person is able to create distance himself from the thoughts which are happening, the negative thoughts. When you think that I am not this thought, I am the living entity which is observing this thought. That space is being created by the Mahamantra. It probably also it actually increases a person's capacity to heal, because it slows down functional aging. So the major takeaway, if you just see the Sankhya philosophy, so the major takeaway is the evolute of consciousness. So is the elements, and the awareness of hearing the vibration actually does a lot of things. So the audible meditation, it actually increases the accuracy to dissociate the mind from excesses of lower modes of nature. So there's also perceptual refinement by interlocking of the sound and mind. And as we can see, the sound is the subtlest of all the sense objects, and the mind is the subtlest of the sattva. So the conclusion is the mechanism of action of the heart region focused audible mantra meditation is likely associated with deep relaxation through activation of better heart-brain connection. The interpretation based on Vedic mantra is creating lightness between the conscious self and the mind, and brings about a sense of clarity, relaxation, and harmony and maintenance. Our clinical research suggests that the audible mantra repetition improves heart rate variability and self-regulation, and a decreased activity of the mind's wandering centers. Therefore, our research is a valid preventive tool and improves outcomes in modern or traditional treatments of chronic negative psychological states.
All right, thank you
So
very much.
Yeah, sorry, I
yeah
took a little extra time.
Thank you very much. All right, on to you, Dr. Uma Pallavi.
So, I'd like to share my screen.
Yes, please.
So thank you very much, Dr. DeMella. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So I would like to take forward the wonderful research presentation of Dr. DeMella on the Mahamantra research that we have conducted in Rishikesh, AIIMS. So I would talk more about the field work and my personal experience, followed by what I'm currently doing at IIT Mandi. So this is our team at AIIMS. So this is what it was like performing this experiment on the Mahamantra. So what you can see on the screen is like a mantra instructor who is instructing the participant in mantra meditation. And down here you see this truth test, and on towards the right hand side bottom is the P300. So we're very grateful to Dr. DeMella for giving us very quality premises in which we could do this research work, and also we had the best of training in terms of the HRV tutorials and training in Mahamantra instruction, and it was done by Dr. Wolf, Dr. Govind Prabhu. So it was one of the best experiences being trained under him to understand the subtleties of how to actually give the mantra to a novice in terms of one who has had absolutely no exposure in the past to the philosophy or no exposure to chanting. So it is to these participants to whom the mantra has been given. And as Dr. Demella was saying, it is the whole group was divided into the test group, the placebo group, and the control group. And I would like to share one memorable experience during this field work, perhaps as a very objective observer of the participants. So as we were giving the mantra to the main test group, who chanted only the mantra, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and there was a placebo group who chanted the Maha Mantra for a few weeks, and then after a break of 2 weeks, they have chanted the placebo. Placebo is another 16-syllable Sanskrit mantra, which is not the Maha Mantra, but it had which had the same phonetic meter. That's the sham sound vibration. So interestingly, what we have observed is the test group which chanted only the Maha Mantra were very comfortable while chanting, although they had no prior exposure, and they had no exposure to the philosophy, absolutely. And then those participants who have been marked, the placebo group, they have chanted the Maha Mantra for the first few weeks, 5 weeks, and then after a break of 2 weeks, they began to chant the placebo. So one remarkable observation by perhaps all the mantra instructors is that the test group chanted the Maha Mantra with good attention, concentration, and absorption. And the placebo group had chanted the Maha Mantra for the first 5 weeks. But when they were exposed and they were made to chant the placebo mantra, they were very restless. And they were like kind of looking at their watch every now and then, and they were not at ease at all. They couldn't focus for long. In between, they took breaks, and they kept on asking the instructors, how long does this go on? And they were pretty much uneasy to chant the sham mantra. So this was a very remarkable observation, because this in itself speaks very clearly about how the Maha Mantra, which actually Prabhupada has mentioned many a times, that it's not some kind of a superficial imposition, but it's very natural to the inner, the soul, perhaps. So that's how we could see that the participants who had absolutely no prior exposure either to the philosophy or to the mantra could easily focus and concentrate on the Maha Mantra. But when they were given the placebo, they were restless and they couldn't focus. So this was, I got this beautiful quote that, so the holy name of Krishna is so attractive that anyone who chants it, including all living entities, so anyone who chants it, even if they didn't have any prior exposure to chanting or the philosophy, they found that attractive. And we could really see that in our participants. And I was told by Dr. Demella, in fact, when they were conducting this experiment back in the US, there was a pilot, a lady who was actually a part of this whole study. And this lady, she had absolutely no connection to even Rama and Krishna. Nonetheless, after the entire study was over, she said, I mean, she had absolutely no conception of God or nothing. And even she said that once the study was done, I would want to continue this mantra for the rest of my life. So this has been a very interesting part of the study to see how the participants have reported their natural absorption and focus on the sound vibration. So, so this was a small experience while I was doing my research in AIIMS Rishikesh. And of course, I would speak something about my current research work that I'm doing at IIT Mandi. So, so I mean, in the previous presentation, Dr. Behra has presented something about the current IKS interventions that are happening now as a part of the research work in IIT Mandi. So I have taken the Bhagavad Gita as an IKS intervention, and I'm trying to study its impact on decision making. So as we all know, that the whole Gita is about how Arjuna has moved from indecision to the decision to fight. It's a journey of Arjuna from indecision to decision. So this is a research work on how spiritual intelligence can impact decision making. So spirituality as such is a form of intelligence, as researchers speak. So I would quickly perhaps speak about the two types of decision making. There is strategic and intuitive decision making, and in intuitive decision making, values and ethics play a very important role. So if you see, decision making is a very huge topic, and perhaps maximum amount of research is conducted on this very topic in the field of management. And in the recent past, the most of the papers are published on how AI, the artificial intelligence, is impacting decision making. So although there are a lot of benefits of how AI is aiding decision making, nonetheless, one of the limitations is that it requires a strong ethical framework to have a holistic or a good, a well-made decision. So this is where the spiritual intelligence actually comes into picture. So these are, perhaps I'll just complete it in another 2 minutes.
Yeah, maybe just 1 more minute.
Okay, so this is where, all right, yeah. So things, I'll just read out some. Okay. So spiritual intelligence has a significant role in the quality of decision-making process. And spiritual quotient is an even inevitable factor in decision-making process. It facilitates problem-solving and goal attainment. And spiritual intelligence implies an adaptive and problem-solving capacity. So this is where the strategic decision-making comes into picture. Strategic decision-making is all about how well one can analyze and synthesize the problem. And there are researchers which speak about how spiritual intelligence can enhance one's problem-solving capacity as well. And workplace spirituality has an significant impact on work attitudes like organizational performance, job involvement, and job commitment. And it's associated with self-interest transcendence. So this is where my current study is about how the Bhagavad Gita can impact decision making. Thank you very much. So I would end my presentation here.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Damarla and Dr. Uma Pallavi. Fantastic research and very interesting. So I'm going to invite Dr. Guruprasad Raghavan next, because we may not have time for questions. Unfortunately, if there are any questions, just request you to maybe type up the answers on the Q&A box. Okay. So thank you very much again. And Dr. Guruprasad Raghavan, who is our next speaker, has a PhD in neuroscience and bioengineering from Caltech. He is the co-founder of the company Yurts AI and has been a longtime collaborator of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. And I've personally enjoyed collaborating with Guruprasad myself. So thank you very much, Guru, for agreeing to speak on the topic natural and artificial intelligence and modeling the mind.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much for, and warm welcome to everyone who's seeing this presentation. I know I have a little lesser time than I expected, but I'm gonna try my best to give you a quick flavor for what we are trying to do here at BI and what I've been thinking of in my. Let me just share my screen and get approval if this works. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to share my entire screen because I think it will just. Okay, so can you see my slides?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so very quickly, what is natural intelligence? What is artificial intelligence? Very simple definition is natural intelligence is all the beautiful intelligence that we see in this created world. And we see how humans we function, how do insects and bugs, when we observe the world, we see that there's some beauty in the way they function. And that's just what I define as natural intelligence. And artificial is that which we as humans actually spend a lot of time creating. And there is a lot of new tools that are out here today that are present. And one more thing is, why should we care about this? Intelligence, or as we know it in the Vedic parlance, buddhi, has many parallels that we can draw between our Vedic literatures and what's there in our modern scientific studies. I believe that it can be a beautiful bidirectional flow. It kind of enhances our understanding of Vedic Shastras. At the same time, we can actually pull concepts from our Vedic literatures to actually enhance or improve our own current academic understanding of what intelligence itself is, and provide potentially good frameworks for actually understanding what intelligence is and what consciousness is potentially. And why should we care about it? So I know I see around 85 to 90 people attending the session. So clearly we know AI is on the rise. It's a toolkit that's almost become ubiquitous across every day. And it's like similar to the dot-com burst of the early 2000s. Right now, 2020, see everyone using a profoundly AI-based tools. So I think it's important to understand what AI is all about and how they are different from today's natural intelligence that we see around us. And also, I know there's a lot of news about robots potentially becoming conscious. I'd like to provide a framework to how to think about this problem, and also share my opinion, my personal opinions, and on how, if this claim is even appropriate or not. So I'm going to quickly move through this. So one of the things is intelligence itself is actually a very important topic in the academic circles. It's actually considered one of the top 18 mathematical problems of the century. And this was a list that was actually composed by a very well-known Fields medalist, or a Nobel laureate in math, basically, Stephen Smale. And I think the Vedic texts have a lot of amazing things to actually share to actually enhance our understanding on this topic. The way I've always thought about this, even during my PhD, was I would take biological systems with natural intelligence, and I'd compare them with today's AI systems. And I'd try to see if there are gaps, or what could be the gaps, or what are the differences between the two systems. So let me give you a quick rundown of, this is circa 2021. So we had AlphaGo, a very amazing AI system that was built to actually play the game of Go. Go is like another strategy game like chess. And it actually defeats, so AlphaGo was a machine that defeated the Go world champion, Lee Sedol, and it made big news, right? So I believe these systems today are superhuman. They can become better than like our world champion. So I know Deep Blue at some point in 1990s actually defeated Garry Kasparov. So you're seeing these systems kind of become better and better over time, and better probably than humans. But I believe they still lack certain principles. And let me get to what those principles of natural intelligence are. So another thing is, we've been very on the tech side, we've been very good at scaling these systems. So the human brain is considered to be like the pinnacle of intelligence. That's because the human brain has 1 billion neurons and 1 trillion synaptic connections. So you see the orange line that I've plotted here, it's basically 10 power 15, which means around 1 trillion connections, which signifies the size of the size of the human brain to a certain extent. And you see, as we go from 1950s to all the way till late 2020s or even 2024, we see our systems that we've built, like artificially, have slowly scaled. We started with like small 100 parameter systems, which were like way different from the brain. And then we said we reached 2020s, we start seeing like billion parameter systems, or even 100 billion parameter systems. Let me push this here. Okay. So, and one of the things that also is like, I would say, leading the revolution here is the things called transformers. So when we think of transformers, because some people think of this, but I'm talking about these architectures. I'm sure the CS people in this community would appreciate, or you have all probably used these systems on a day-to-day. And I just wanted to say, like, everyone's heard of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is the system that has close to 175 billion parameters. So it's getting there. It's getting closer and closer to the size of that human brain. So I'd like to like do a quick, I know we have time, little time, but let me show you a quick demo of how ChatGPT is. I'm sure quite a few have already like played around with these tools, but I thought it'd be fun to just see them together for those who may have not had the opportunity of doing so. Okay, so I could do something like this. Like I can ask this question, how are you doing today? And it's like, it starts answering in pretty, pretty well. And then you ask something like this. So if it asks me anything interesting going on, like, yeah, it's been a fun day so far. I'm trying to demo your abilities on a large Zoom event. Are you ready to stun us? And great. So it's asking me to do this thing. So, and then it asks me, what are you showcasing on your Zoom event? And I say this. So I'm presenting that although AI systems like yourself are very human-like, you're still not human. Do you agree? And well, it agrees that it's not human-like, and it agrees that it can only simulate human-like responses, and it says that we lack true consciousness, which is interesting. Again, to have these AI systems speak in this manner, and given that we'll finally again retest it and say, can you crack a joke? Because I can't see my audience, so I don't even know if there's a smirk or there's a smile on their face. But let's see if they can, if this can at least. This is a very classic joke that it always makes up. But why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything, anyways. So getting back to our presentation, right? So we have systems like ChatGPT seem pretty magical. They're like, wow, I can actually start chatting with these agents. And they actually give me very intelligent responses, and they actually help me on a lot of different tasks. So the question naturally is, okay, it seems like we've been able to build intelligent systems that maybe surpass us. And I'd love, I mean, of course, when time permits, I would love to like get more feedback from the audience on like what prompts or questions they'd like to ask ChatGPT. But on that note, I'd like to also think, how do these systems remain different from humans? So it comes down to like, what are those principles of natural intelligence that are currently absent in today's AI systems? One is, this is like, you need a large amount of training data for actually training these AI systems. And I'll give you an example of what, ChatGPT's kind of systems require. So when you go and read their papers, we know that they've trained on a lot of text. So the entire Wikipedia corpus, so everyone's familiar with Wikipedia, it is just 0.1% of their training data. What does that even mean? So I pulled up a Wikipedia article. Of course, everyone's heard of CrowdStrike since yesterday's debacle. And Wikipedia itself has up to 61 million web pages. So that's just 0.1% of their entire training data. So a ChatGPT-like system has been trained on 61 billion such web pages. Now, just to put things in context, right? To speak intelligently and to speak eloquently, these systems need to be trained on a huge amount of data. Whereas on the sharp contrast, we see humans like kids or adults. I'm sure none of us have read 61 billion web pages in our entire lifetime. So clearly there is something that's amiss. Like what's going on? What's different between how are we able to learn so quickly? How are we able to how if you see kids, they see maybe once or twice something and they're like already picking things up. What's different about them? How is our brain wiring different, or what else is actually important to learn quickly? So I think this is a important feature that's very different between our today's AI systems, the way we build them, and natural intelligence systems. Also, this intelligence is not this, this quick learning is not only limited to humans. It's actually it's a feature of our world. Like some things that like I spent some time reading about like mud wasps. So they're called mud daubers or mud wasps. And the beautiful thing about them is they actually create these intricate nests. And what's amazing about them is this is their life cycle, right? So a wasp comes, it's like, let's say you have a nest and the wasp comes inside the nest, it goes inside and lays an egg. And, then afterwards the child is born within the nest. The child's born within the nest, the mother keeps, flying into the nest, feeding, giving it all the food that it needs and, nourishing it and all of that. And after a few weeks that child is like, ready, it's become, it's able to fly. So it kind of comes out of the nest. And almost instantaneously, researchers have found that it starts creating another nest. So the question is, they've not taken a civil engineering course on how to create these beautiful intricate nests. Where is this knowledge coming from? Where is this intelligence coming from? So how are they so quickly either learning, or how are they just downloaded with all of this beautiful knowledge on how to create these nests? So these are open questions, and at this point we have no concrete, tangible answers for them. Of course, our Vedic text suggests some very interesting alternatives of how to think about this, but we still, in our scientific parlance, we are still yet to, understand what's the source of that knowledge and where does it come from. For context, and these are these wasps that you're seeing on panel A. They actually create these nests and this is like nest creation kind of a process. So it starts building these small combs, and then afterwards it makes these intricate holes and a lot of beautiful architecture around it. Okay, so let's move to the next principle. Next principle is, so another thing that's amazing is, I'm sure everyone would have heard this, even hearing it in Prabhupada's books or in his lectures. It's like, Einstein is an intelligent person, definitely, but he didn't create his own brain, right? His brain basically came from biological processes, and we have a lot of other things that actually go into that basically went into even having his brain. So the question is growth and self-organization of neural architecture. And if you see ChatGPT-like systems, to build these systems, it takes a huge amount of human capital and a lot of GPU computation, which translates to millions of dollars for actually building such artificial systems. But when you look at our brains or any insect brains, they just come from a process of self-organization, and they come from a process of not just self-organization is I would say, one part of the whole puzzle. There's a lot of other processes that just so-called quote unquote happen, in a very natural fashion. And that doesn't require a lot of, I would say, it's not like there's a huge amount of human endeavor that goes into actually creating these intelligent systems like our human brain, or for instance, our entire body. So the question is, where does all of this intelligence for actually, creating either not just the brain, but the entire body from a single cell, where does that intelligence come from? Because we don't have such, I would say, parallels in our artificial intelligence world, where we can just maybe drop a seed and suddenly you have a ChatGPT-like system come from scratch. We need a lot of hand tuning and tweaking for actually building these architectures and systems. I'd like to the interest of time, I'd like to show this small video very quickly. I won't be able to show the entire video, it's 6 minutes long, but what I'd want to point out is definitely go check this out. So here, just to give you context, researchers have actually, they've tried to study how a single zygote, which is, the first cell, basically, slowly grows and matures over time to become this beautiful tadpole with a functioning heart, with a functioning set of neurons, and the intelligence to actually go and function in the real world. And they've captured this over I believe it's over 10 to 12 hours, and they've made a quick time lapse. So let's see if we can see this. So it starts, okay, great. So it starts off here. It starts with a single cell, and the single cell breaks into multiple cells. And here you go. You have 4 cells now, and 8. And as you grow, so this is the phase of, in embryology, I'm sure many of you have seen embryology. So you'd have the different phases in the generation of an organism. And that's when it starts making these I would say these invaginations into the system. And then you start seeing some kind of structure slowly emerging. I'm gonna move forward. And yes, so that's where actually, so you start seeing the tadpole slowly kind of, you see the longitudinal structure that starts emerging from here. And the eyes and the heart haven't, so you start seeing a part of the, I would say, different circulatory systems coming into picture. Then the pigments have already come here now. And now you have the eyes as well that have developed. there was somewhere in this video, they had also a beautiful beating heart that they show. And all of these, this is like, they have translucent blood basically. So this is like how cells within the system actually keep moving around. And so that's another part that actually is all of these systems kind of come into picture. Yes, here's the heart that's pumping. So basically so the point here I'm trying to make is it's stunning to see how development kind of happens and how not just intelligence, but conscious, and like, where does the origin of a conscious entity begin? And these are open questions in the scientific parlance. And of course, Vedic literature has a lot of amazing insight to provide for actually working on these. All right, moving on. Another last example that I'll take before I end this in my presentation is, there's this flexibility of the mind. And one thing is, when we think, as like, if we were to like take some time out and actually just like sit and see how our thoughts basically move, that's something that's beautiful, because there is a lot of associative, I would say, learning and associative movement of thoughts in our that we perceive. So for instance, a very common example could be, going to like say a store, clothes store, and if you had a childlike experience of going to a store and maybe drinking a beverage, then you'd probably see a bunch of other I would say food items close by, and that memory would basically start, the beverage itself would force you to recall some other memories. So the question is, how does the mind first of all store all of these, and how do you actually traverse this, I would say, sequence of thoughts? And to work on this, there is another thing is, in addition to just like traversing these sequence of thoughts, we'd also want to model the subjective experience of the experiencer while they recall these things, because there are certain things, like for instance, ice cream, it's going to be sweet, you're going to like, you have a subjective feeling of how much you like it. And maybe for some of you, it might be Karela is something, or a bitter gourd is something that, you don't like at all. So there are these differences that we have as subjective feelings. And up until today, like, there's a lot of phenomenal work in the modeling of the mind that's happened in academic sciences, but the subjective part of this is not at all captured typically. And I think to capture the subjective part and also then bring mathematics to it, some of the work that Kunal and Shrey, both of them at IIT Kanpur, have worked on with the BIHS is been fantastic. So they've actually built models where they're trying to understand, here's the experiencer, and you have all these objects like the ice cream, the cookie, and could be other kinds of foods. And then each object has its own set of, I would say, emotions, taste, shape, temperature. All of these are the attributes of this object itself. And this is how we store information about our world. And this is a project where we're trying to model, I would say, a preliminary model of the mind. And this would actually help us start traversing this particular sequence of thoughts and sequence of objects in this space. With this, I'd like to quickly end with this, but last point I wanted to say was, again, switching back to the question that I had posed earlier, like, hey, can robots ever become conscious? And today in scientific parlance, we don't have a good framework to actually even ask and answer this question, because we've conflated consciousness with the mind, with the intelligence. So if ChatGPT does really well on responding to my questions, I'm willing to say, yes, it's conscious. But no, our Vedic texts have actually suggested a very interesting way to actually divide how to think about this question. So they say, hey, there are many, many layers to this. So there's the Panchamahabhut, the earth, water, fire, air, ether. These are the base ground. Then you have mind, you have intelligence. Over that, you have ego. It's like the I-ness, right? And then afterwards, over that is the entity, the experiencer itself. So today's digital AI systems, I believe, yes, they have earth, water. Yep, they are made of, actual bare metal. They are GPU based. So yes. Then there's mind, yes, to a certain extent, because, you have a mind. The definition of the mind is basically to accept or reject. So, you can actually ask these systems and they'll probably reject and accept certain propositions. Intelligence, yes, I believe so, because again, intelligence is like, can you now recently there's work on like self-introspection in AI systems where you can actually make them kind of like introspect on their answers and then get back to you. So yeah, you could say intelligence probably exists. Ego, maybe not. Like there is a company called Character.ai, and they build these systems, these AI avatars with like specific, I would say, personality. So you can speak to like these AI assistants with with some personality. Like I would say you want to speak to, let's say, I'm blanking on, like, say Harry Potter, for instance. You can have an AI assistant that knows everything about Harry Potter and thinks and speaks like Harry Potter, speaks like a pirate. So those things can be potentially even modeled within the system, but it's not yet the best place. So that's when I said not yet. I think within a few years we will actually probably maybe even perfect that art. Consciousness, or what consciousness itself is, I believe today, my opinion is, of course, that digital AI systems do not have consciousness, and that's again, this is a big debate and a big topic to be talked about. But I believe if we think of it in these rungs, we could probably better understand whether these systems can ever have consciousness or not. Without getting into further details, here's where I end, and thank you so much for all your time. And of course, I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to answer those. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them on the.
Yeah, there are a few interesting questions actually in the Q&A box. Firstly, thank you very much for that very thought-provoking presentation. While we switch to the next speaker, maybe we'll just take one which might be somewhat relevant. There, again, as I said, there are a few. Feel free to answer them by typing them up in the Q&A box later. But will AI have an impact on spirituality in the future? We'll just take this one question while we switch the speaker. Yes, and Rita, please, video and
yeah. So the way that's a really good question. Thank you for that question. So the way I've thought about everything, like I'm gonna, again, like based on what my understanding of spirituality itself is, we can use every tool for and to help progress our understanding of who we are and who Paramatma is and who Krishna is, and I would say improve our progress in our spiritual direction. One thing is there, so like how computation or how like for instance, our source of knowledge right now is like the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam, for understanding what spiritual truths are there. And if we didn't have a printing press, we would actually not have access to that information. If we didn't have the internet, we would probably not have access to that information. So I believe AI also will basically be a very useful tool to actually provide all of this information and like more in our fingertips. One thing I'd like to also point out is I know there is a group at Silicon Valley who's actually working on a really cool project to help devotees and like just members of people who are interested in spiritual sciences to actually quickly use a ChatGPT like experience to actually quickly get answers for their deep questions. And I think this is a very important thing because information retrieval, or quick and smart information retrieval, especially in for spiritual texts, because is something that will be very valuable in the near future. So I think it will definitely aid our understanding very much.
Fantastic. And with this, we all thank Guru Prasad again. Thank you very much for joining. There are a few questions, as I said. Please do answer those as possible.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Rita Jane, who is also known as Amritananda Devidasi. She is an archaeologist, an Indologist, and an associate professor at the Bhaktivedanta College in Hungary. So thank you very much for being here.
Is my sound audible? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you and see your slides.
That's very good. Thank you very much. I thank the Bhaktivedanta Institute for including my research into this summer school. My talk is about shifting paradigms in Indian archaeology, but let me give you a short introduction to my background and on what basis I study these questions. So Bhaktivedanta College in Hungary was established in 1998, and I am a senior lecturer there. It is a state accredited and state funded college, and we have programs in yoga and Vaishnava theology, both on the BA and MA level. I myself am the head of department of the Vaishnava theology, and we have 250 students currently. And recently we entered to the Erasmus program. So this allows us to exchange students, and also for the teachers of the college to give visitation or invite to the college from foreign universities. So for the students abroad, we offer courses in English from 2025. My own academic background is from the Eötvös Loránd University, Budapest, where I completed my MA degrees on Indology and archaeology as well. During my PhD studies, I combined the Indology and the archaeology, and I worked on the questions of the history of Indian archaeology, and this PhD was a co-tutel program. So it was in an agreement between the Eötvös Loránd University and Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, Pune, and therefore I was part of both university programs. And my affiliation with the Deccan College allowed me to participate at the excavations of Harappan sites. These excavations were led by Professor Vasant Shinde from Deccan College, and with the team of Professor Shinde, I worked for several seasons at the sites of Gilund, Parmana, and Rakhigari. In Budapest, this year, I worked in a close collaboration with the Ferenc Hoppe Museum of Asiatic Art. This is the main museum in Hungary, which focuses on South Asian art and archaeology, among other Asian fields, of course. I have planned and curated a poster exhibition, which is called the Indus 100 exhibition, and it is installed in the garden of the museum, and it commemorates the centenary of the international discovery of the Indus civilization. So this exhibition gives a very good chance to reach the wider public, and we organize a number of events like the Night of the Museums or the Days of the Cultural Heritage, which these events are broadcasted all over the country, and they offer free programs for basically everybody in each museums. So during these programs, I can speak about the archaeology of South Asia, which is quite an unknown field in Hungary. Today on this seminar, I would like to start with one point, which is one of the main topics of this exhibition, and that is a paradigm shift that occurred exactly 100 years ago. It was only 100 years ago when, in 1924, archaeologists were able to date the Indus, or in other name, the Harappan civilization, to the 3rd millennium BC. Now we understand that the Indus civilization is the oldest known urban civilization in South Asia, and it is contemporary with the ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. But before 1924, the true age of ancient India was unknown, and researchers recognize India's past going back only to the time of Alexander the Great, and that is the 4th century BC. Alexander's campaign, as this map shows, reached the Indus River, and he was successful in his battles, so he crossed the river, and still he couldn't go further because his army decided they want to go back, they want to go home. So the whole army turned south and went to south along the Indus River and then turned back. So because along the Indus River, you can find ancient ruined cities, everybody thought that these ruins belonged to cities which were destroyed by Alexander the Great during his campaign, so that they are not much older than the 4th century BC. In the exhibition, I tell the story of how this paradigm was changed, and I think this is interesting because it's a very good example to show how new discoveries can change mainstream views, and it actually happened within a few weeks. Also, I think it is interesting to know that the Western world, the concept of ancient India is quite young in the Western world. And Sir John Marshall, who was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India at that time, described this shift as follows. Hitherto, India has almost universally been regarded as one of the younger countries of the world. Apart from Paleolithic and Neolithic implements and such rude primitive remains, no monuments of note were known to exist of an earlier date than the 3rd century BC. Now, at a single bound, we have taken back our knowledge of Indian civilization some 3,000 years earlier. There were 2 key sites in this recognition, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. As I mentioned earlier, these 2 sites were known as ancient ruined cities, but their true age was unknown. In Harappa, the documentation started in the 1850s, and in Mohenjo-daro in the early years of the 20th century. By 1924, several objects were collected and excavated from these 2 sites, but these objects did not show a close connection with anything from the territory of India until then, nor with any of any other ancient civilization. These are some of the earliest objects found in Harappa, and they are presently kept in the British Museum. When researchers examined these square seals, they could not connect the pictographic signs to any of the Indian writing systems. And therefore, they thought that the seals are foreign objects. Even the engraved animal figure could not be connected with the well-known Ampad bull from India. So the age and cultural affiliation of the two discovered cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, remained unanswered until 1924. Sir John Marshall decided to seek the assistance of a wider scholarly circle. On September 20th, 1924, he published the photographs of the most characteristic finds of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in the columns of a weekly journal, a weekly magazine, the Illustrated London News. The publisher articulated Marshall's question, as you can read on the slide. At Sir Marshall's suggestion, we give all the photographs of seals so that there may be a greater chance of any of our expert readers help to elucidate the script. So the title of this magazine piece was First Light on a Long Forgotten Civilization. And Sir John Marshall says, now, however, there has unexpectedly been unearthed in the south of the Punjab and in Sindh an entirely new class of objects which have nothing in common with those previously known to us and which are unaccompanied by any data that might have helped to establish their age and origin. Doubts about the age of the Indus pines were dispelled within weeks. On September 27, an Assyriologist, Archibald Henry Sayce, published his response, and in this, he described the discovery even more remarkable and startling than Marshall originally supposed. He said that the discovery opens up a new historical vista and is likely to revolutionize our ideas of the age and origin of Indian civilization. So in summary, the excavations in Mesopotamia revealed several parallels of the Harappan seal, but from datable layers. So the sites along the Indus, originally thought to be from the time of Alexander, were dated back to the 3rd millennium BC. This paradigm shift occurred during the time of India's British occupation. And after independence, several new sites were explored in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Haryana, expanding the territory of the Indus civilization. Now we can say that it was the largest among the ancient civilizations of the world. The 100 years of research gave us detailed knowledge about the planning of the Indus cities. We have detailed chronology, which was based on ceramic finds. The roots of the Indus civilization were traced back to several millennia, thanks to the excavations of Mehrgarh. Research in ancient technology revealed how sophisticated craftsmen worked in the Indus cities, and recent discoveries revealed that trade routes and relations across the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. However, although we have all these results, there are still many questions unanswered connected with the Indus civilization, starting with its writing system. After many trials, we still don't have consent on how to read the Indus signs, and maybe discoveries can bring new insights to this area. Then we still wonder about the exact causes of the decline of the civilization, and environmental studies with technologies like satellite imagery can bring new discoveries to this area. Now I would like to talk about another field that might bring some shift in paradigms in the archaeology of South Asia, and that is the research at Rakhigori. Deccan College was the lead institution in the research of ancient DNA from Harappan sites. This is a relatively new field in archaeology, and ancient DNA has never been obtained from Harappan skeletons before. The reason to this is that old excavations were not careful enough not to contaminate these samples, as they were not even aware of this possibility. And even on new sites, it is actually very difficult to obtain DNA samples from skeletons from this part of the world because of the climate. So here there is extreme cold, extreme hot. Also, there is rainy season and the summer, which is after that there is a dry season. So this doesn't help the skeletal remains to endure. The team led by Vasant Shinde were able to change this, and they obtained DNA samples from the Harappan cemetery of Rakhigori. These were analyzed and published, and according to Professor Shinde, the skeletal remains of these particular persons show less connection with the Iranian plateau and more with the people of later South Asia. Something similar can be said about the face recognition studies. They were done by computer, and again, this was the first in Harappan archaeology. So Professor Shinde argues that both the DNA analysis and the face reconstruction suggest a continuity between the inhabitants of ancient Rakhigori and the inhabitants of later South Asia. So this research is often referred as a strong argument in the paradigm shift of the Aryan migration theory. So in conclusion, I would like to say that a new research can always bring some shift in paradigms. And my experience is that the archaeology of South Asia is a very active field. So I am sure that we won't have to wait for another 100 years to see some new results that might shift or present paradigms on ancient India. Thank you very much. And thank you, Kunal, for
Dr. Rita, for that fascinating talk. I'd just like to mention to all our viewers here that at BIHS, some of us are actively looking for those who might be very well trained academically in archaeology, history, and heritage. So if you or any of your acquaintances are trained in any of these disciplines, then please connect with the BIHS through info@bihstudies.org. Thank you. And with this, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Michael Cremo, who is also known as Drutakarma Das. He is an archaeologist most famous for his work on human antiquity, and he is the author of several books such as The Forbidden Archaeology, Human Devolution, and The City of Nine Gates. He has been involved with the Bhaktivedanta Institute since 1984. So thank you for being here, Dr. Michael Cremo, and we'd be grateful if you could start presenting your screen.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I thank the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies for including me in the program, and welcome to everyone who's viewing. Let me see if I can get a screen share going. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
So today I'm speaking about Vedic archaeology. The Vedas, of course, are the Sanskrit texts of ancient India, and I'm using the term Vedas to include the Puranas, or the histories, which are sometimes called the fifth Veda in addition to the 4 original Vedas, Rig, Sama, Artava, and Yajur. So by Vedic archaeology, I mean archaeology informed by the Vedic literature. And there are several topics that I think are of interest from this standpoint. The first is one that we just heard from Dr. Rita Yene about, which is the history of India for the past 5 or 10,000 years. For followers of the Vedic tradition, we often mention that, for example, Lord Krishna was present 5,000 years ago at the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, and that Krishna visited Vedic cities such as Mathura and Dwarka and others, but that is not part of the current dominant paradigm in archaeology and anthropology. We'll talk about each of these topics later on. Some of them I've investigated personally, others I know about, but would like to see further research done. So the second topic is one of those, the worldwide presence of Vedic culture. Any evidence for that would be welcome. The third topic is one that I've personally had some experience with, and that is indigenous archaeology in India. The fourth topic that I find interesting is archaeoastronomy and exoarchaeology, and I'll be defining those terms in a moment when we get to that topic. And then the topic of extreme human antiquity, which I'm best known for. So regarding the history of India for the past 5 to 10,000 years, the current dominant paradigm is that while there is no evidence for a specifically Vedic urban civilization within the bounds of the Indian subcontinent, there is the Indus Valley civilization, which dates back at least 5,000 years, and its main sites are listed there in this map. The cultural identity of the population of this civilization is not currently known. The language isn't known. We heard in the past presentation by Dr. Yene that the script of this civilization hasn't been deciphered, so that would help. So according to the current paradigm, the specifically Sanskrit-speaking or Vedic cultural elements entered the Indian subcontinent from the northwest, from the Indo-Iranian plateau, somewhat less than 5,000 years ago, about 3,500 years ago. So future discoveries may aid us in defining the cultural identity of the Indus civilization population, but in the absence of a decipherment of the script, other elements may contribute to our understanding of these things. This is the Indus Valley civilization site of Lothal, which is in present-day Gujarat state in northwestern India. The site dates back to 4,400 to 3,900 years ago. And I visited that site and did some research on the city planning aspect of it. Now, the Vedic civilization had a system of architecture and town planning called Vastu. And the planning for structures and settlements was based on a grid, a Vastu grid that is rectangular, actually square shaped, and the sides of the square are in the directions of the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. If we look at the site plan of Lothal, that was drawn up by the original discoverers of the site, we see that if we orient it towards the north, basically it conforms to a standard Vastu grid. But not only that, the streets are laid out going north, south, east, west. The buildings are oriented towards the north, south, east, and west. And the elements of the settlement conform to the Vastu principle that the activities related to the Vaishyas or the economic class, such as a warehouse for storing trade goods found in the southeastern area, the activities of the working class, the workshops for making beads and other objects used and traded by the civilization are concentrated in the southwestern area, which is, according to Vastu principles, the spiritual activities, as indicated by fire altars, were discovered in the northern area, and the administrative or governmental buildings are located on the eastern side. Here, this again is according to Vastu principles. Also, the whole community is served by an elaborate system for eliminating wastewater and things like that. And the drainage system goes to the east, which is also according to Vastu principles. So in the absence of a decipherment of the script, in addition to archaeological evidence, this type of evidence may also be helpful in identifying the culture of the population. The second topic that I think is of interest to persons interested in Vedic archaeology would be evidence for the worldwide presence of Vedic culture. Now, I haven't personally investigated this topic myself to any great detailed degree, but I have encountered many references to similarities between the architecture of, say, South India and Central America, civilizations like the Mayan civilization. So I think there is a lot of anecdotal and evidence for this, and it would be good for it to be investigated in a more scientific way that would take into account modern conceptions of how such similarities could arise. Archaeologists say there are different ways in which this could happen, one being simply by chance, which hardly seems likely, or by diffusion of ideas and concepts from one culture to another, or by actual migration of people with these concepts from one geographical location to another. A topic that I've explored in some depth is the presence of an indigenous archaeology tradition in India, apart from the concept of archaeology that was introduced into India by the Europeans, such as the British, especially during their time of colonial presence in India. And they organized the Archaeological Survey of India, which is continued under Indian under the Indian government that took over when India became independent in 1948. So this indigenous tradition involves discoveries of lost sacred images and sacred places by saints using what we might call paranormal methods. For example, Rupa Goswami, a follower of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the 16th century, discovered the lost deity of Govindaji, and he did it by a vision. He was inspired in a vision to go to the location and conduct an excavation. So many of the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself were engaged in such archaeology in the sense of excavating lost sacred images and lost sacred places. Now, Rupa Goswami's Govindaji deity was originally housed in this temple, the Govindaji temple in Vrindavan, India. And if you go there today, it's no longer a functioning temple, but you can visit the place. And alongside the altar, there's a stairway that goes down into the ground. And there's a chamber in which the place where Rupa Goswami excavated the Govindaji deity is marked, and worshippers leave offerings there. Today, the Govindaji image or deity or murti is located in Jaipur in Rajasthan. I've published academic papers on this topic. For example, there's this paper, Excavating the Eternal, an Indigenous Archaeological Tradition in India, which was published in Antiquity, which is one of the main mainstream archaeology journals. And I've also pointed out that although the techniques used in this indigenous archaeological tradition seem alien to the Western scientific type of archaeology, in that, say, Rupa Goswami used visions and dreams to locate his discoveries. Something similar has gone on in modern science, although it's very little, not well known among today's scientists. For example, J.T. Robinson, who was a South African paleontologist who did major research at the Sterkfontein caves in South Africa, finding fossil remains of Australopithecus, used a psychic in his work. This photograph shows Dr. Robinson in the Sterfontein Caves, and he recruited a psychic, Jeffrey Hudson, who he used to try to get information about fossils and artifacts he discovered. This psychic would go into trance in the cave, and Dr. Robinson would place a fossil or artifact on his forehead, and the psychic would envision the creature that was represented by the fossil acting millions of years ago. And Robinson recorded these visions and used them to help interpret the fossils and artifacts he discovered. I presented a paper about this at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress, and it was later published in an academic peer-reviewed publication. Another topic that I find interesting, in which I haven't done a whole lot of research about myself, is the topics of archaeoastronomy and exoarchaeology. First, we'll deal with archaeoastronomy. That is the study of how archaeological objects and sites and structures may encode detailed astronomical information, indicating that whoever made and designed these artifacts or structures had high level of knowledge of astronomy. For example, I went to Angkor Wat, and what we see here is the front entrance to the temple complex. And it's constructed in such a way that on the summer solstice, the sun rises directly over the left end of the front wall of the temple complex. And when the fall equinox comes, the sun rises over the central gate of the front wall of the temple complex. And then it moves to the winter solstice on the right hand, and then going back to the spring equinox and back to the summer solstice. So whoever designed this place and built it had a deep understanding of the movements of the sun throughout the course of the year. The temple complex also has wall carvings that depict the churning of the milk ocean, which is described in the Bhagavad Purana or Srimad Bhagavatam. The wall carving depicts the demons and the demigods churning the milk ocean using Mount Mandara as the churning rod, and the churning rod is resting on the back of the Kurma avatar, the incarnation of Krishna as a great tortoise. So on one side, they have depicted all of the demons pulling on one end of the serpent Vasuki, who was used as the churning rope. And on the other side of this stone relief, there are depicted the demigods pulling their end. And if you calculate the number of demons and the number of demigods, they correspond to the number of days from the equinox to the solstice. So this stone carving encodes detailed astronomical information. So this is something that archaeologists and astronomers and astrophysicists can possibly cooperate on, is detecting this kind of information encoded in archaeological structures and artifacts. So exoarchaeology is the second topic in this module. And that means the study of archaeological remains off the earth. Actually, it's very surprising. Mainstream archaeologists at their professional conferences, such as meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, have had whole sessions on extraterrestrial archaeology. One of the things that they're considering is what will happen when archaeologists go to the moon and start collecting objects that we've sent there. According to the history, the United States sent several probes and manned missions to the moon and left artifacts there. So whose museum will they go into? Who will own them? Archaeologists are discussing these things actively in their professional gatherings. They are also considering what will they do if they find artifacts or structures that we are not responsible for. In other words, archaeological remains left by human-like beings from other planets or other parts of the cosmos.
Michael, just
And
maybe more minutes.
yes.
Thank you.
Avi Loeb, head of the astronomy department at Harvard University, has discussed this issue, and he's identified an object that recently entered our solar system as possibly a probe from another civilization outside the Earth. He did that in his book, Extraterrestrial, First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth. And finally, there is more research needed in the topic of extreme human antiquity. As my guru, Srila Prabhupada, mentioned, the Vedic histories, the Puranas and Mahabharata, relate human histories that extend millions of years into the past. So there are discoveries that are consistent with that. Sadhuputta, Dr. Richard L. Thompson, and I documented that evidence in our book, Forbidden Archaeology. And I've had some academic publications on this topic, such as this paper, Puranic Time in the Archaeological Record. So these are some of my books on this topic. And we have a special offer for a set of 5 of my books on this topic. And that's some contact information. So thank you very much, Kunal, for hosting me at this summer school talk on Vedic archaeology.
Thank you very much. And I am going to request you to answer the questions in the Q&A box, if that's okay. We don't have time to take them live, unfortunately. So we do apologize for that. But just to reiterate, the BIHS is actively looking for historians and archaeologists. So if any of the audience members, you're trained academically in any of these disciplines, please do get in touch with the BIHS at info@bihstudies.com. And with this, I am happy to welcome our next speaker. We do apologize that we are running a few minutes late, so I'm going to request Dr. Mauricio Garrido, who is also known as Murli Gopal Das. He has a PhD in physics and is currently a medical physicist at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. So Murli Gopal is going to tell us all about his latest book, Krishna and the Quark, but I am going to request him to please keep it to a few minutes if possible, so that we can finish this somewhat in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start then immediately. I'll be speaking today about Krishna and the Quark, which is my upcoming book on that will be published by the BBT. And see, I will only be able to touch on a few things on it because it would be too much to go over it. So the title is Krishna and the Quark, and I'll be mainly speaking about space, time, and a little bit on matter. So let's start with time. I wish it did not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And if you're a Tolkien fan, you will know that this is from the Fellowship of the Ring. So what do we know about time? And it's something so common, but we really have no idea of what it is. And let us look at some of the questions that have been asked by not only physicists, but also philosophers throughout time. One is there such thing as fatalism or predetermination? Basically, is my future set? Can I do anything about it? And the Greeks wrote a whole drama called Oedipus. And in terms of physics, we hear about, well, there's a deterministic view that, well, the laws of physics, if you give it, here are the laws, and if you give it the initial conditions, it will tell you exactly what will be in the future. Now, you may have also heard about chaotic systems, which are still deterministic. They will still tell you what is in the future, but maybe it's not tractable, such as this spiral that you see here. Yes, it is deterministic. You can compute it, but can you track it down? Probably not. And then there is quantum physics, which is a truly random system. So in these systems, this idea that you can completely foretell what something is going to be in the future goes out the window. Then there is the time freeze. Is it possible to freeze time? Basically, if all of the world, all of the universe stopped for, let's say, an hour, and then went back as if nothing had happened, would we ever know about it? Well, if this is possible or not really has to do with the idea of, is time relational or absolute? And this goes back to Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. Newton had the idea that there was an absolute time. So in this sense, yes, he would say there is an absolute time, and time freeze is possible because that time does not need the objects in it to exist. On the other hand, Leibniz said, no, time is relational. It only exists as a relation between objects. If you take out all the objects, there is no time because there's no relation. Then they argued this back and forth, and it's still to the end of their lives. There was no consensus. What is the topology of time? Is time branched? Is time linear? Is time cyclical? Is it continuous? What is it? So Newton, he said time is absolute and it's linear. Einstein saw it as relational and continuous. Basically, he merged space and time and into a space-time continuum. Hugh Everett, another physicist, he talked about the branched multiverses. Basically, in every time that you have a universe, and it can there are different possibilities. For example, this man talking to this girl, giving her a flower. In one universe, she blows him off, and in the other one, she falls in love with him. And there are so many different possibilities that go with it. And with each possibility, there's a different universe that happens. So that comes from Everett's multiverse. And now it's so common in the MCU. And then we have quantum loop gravity, which is one of the proposals for the beyond the standard model of today's physicists, and in which space-time is seen as discontinuous, basically like a space-time foam, going from one point in time to another. If you go small enough, you won't have there will be a point at which you just jump from one instant to the next. That's their proposal. Then we also have the idea of time travel, which excites the imagination like no other. Well, special relativity talked about the possibility of going forward in time, and as you see here, we have the famous twin paradox, in which two twins, both living on Earth, one of them gets in a spaceship, goes and travels out at near the speed of light and comes back. Well, because traveling near to the speed of light, one ages here on Earth much more than the one that went on the trip. So going forward in time, that has been proved with cesium clocks, and they have put them one here on Earth and one on a plane, and they saw that yes, you can go forward in time that way. But going backward, is it possible? Well, you would have to go to general relativity, where they talk about wormholes, where you can, if you go through a space-time wormhole from the present to the future, or you can go from the future to the past. Are they traversable? We still don't know, because we would have to merge together the ideas from general relativity and from quantum physics. But you would have problems like the grandfather paradox, which we don't know if could be resolved or not, which is the idea that if you go back to kill your grandfather, then how do you explain your existence, right? And is it possible? Well, to be able to have a possibility of having time travel, you would have to talk about space-time worms. Basically, the idea that there's a version of you continuous throughout time. So just as you exist right now, you existed before and you exist in the future. Now, is that actually the case? We don't know. But let's say that it is the case, that a version of you exists constantly throughout time as a space-time worm. Well, you would be just like one slice of this. That would be the present you. But then, how do you talk about the arrow of time? Like, if you're the space-time worm, what is making you believe or perceive that time is going forward, rather than just like constantly experiencing all of time at the same time? Why do you experience only time in the forward? So physicists have talked about entropy and the second law of thermodynamics being that arrow of time which points forward, in which the bigger the entropy, the more you go. But why would that be the case? We don't know yet. And finally, we have the question of, is time an illusion? Well, we have people like Price, which is his philosopher, and he talks about how the projection of the mind, time is a projection of the mind to add a subjective experience. But then you have a physicist like Marco Polo Calamara, who says that actually we should wait off in talking about these things because general relativity is not the final theory of time. Now let's go into space. Here's a quote from Walt Whitman. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle. Again, we have Newton and Leibniz. Newton, likewise, he said that there is an absolute space. And so if you take everything out of it, there will still be space. And Leibniz said, no, space is relational, just like time, in which if you take all the objects out of it, there is no more space because space only exists as relations. Einstein later on went to talk more and encourage the idea of Leibniz that space actually is relational. The way that he did it was saying, well, if you have a map is drawn on a paper, on a piece of paper. So the piece of paper is the space-time. And that paper doesn't really, it's useless. What really matters here is the relation between one piece of matter and the next on the metric, right? The metric of the map. So that's how Einstein saw it. And furthermore, we talk about, as we're talking about space, we talk about is it possible to travel space, basically interstellar space, going from here to other star systems. Well, ideas have been proposed like solar sails, in which you use the solar winds to propel with a special type of sail. Nuclear-powered engines or antimatter engines that will hopefully use very little fuel, but give you a lot of power for a long time. Then there's the idea of traversable wormholes, just like we saw in the previous slide about these wormholes connecting to points in time. It can also connect to places in the universe. But are they traversable? Are they not? Again, we don't know yet because we don't have a theory that connects general relativity with quantum physics. And finally, we have ideas like the Alcubierre bubbles, in which you bend space-time in such a way that even though this ship stays put in this local space, the space itself moves faster than the speed of light. So according to this, you would not be moving really, but the space around you would be moving at the speed of light. So what can we say about this from the point of view of the East? Well, here's a quote by one of the founding fathers of quantum physics, Werner Heisenberg. He says, quantum theory will not look ridiculous to people who have read Vedanta. There's Sankhya, which is one of the 6 systems of classical philosophy of India. And for Sankhya, time is not fundamental, nor is it real.
We wrap up in a minute or so, if possible.
Okay, so for them, space is also not fundamental, but it is real. They talk about Akash, which is related to the modern idea of space. And so we see here that there are many different evolutions till you finally get to space. Vaisheshika, on the other hand, which is another system, says that time and space are fundamental and perceived only indirectly. And as you see here, space comes much in another thing, but they are fundamental. Is it possible to travel to the past? According to both Vaisheshika and Sankhites, they agree that time travel to the past is not possible. But for Vaisheshikas, it's an impossibility of relations, while for Sankhites, there is no past to go to because there's only the present moment. Space and time in Vedanta. For Vedanta, like in Srimad Bhagavatam, we see that space and time emerge from Vishnu, as you see here. From Vishnu comes Pradhana and comes time. Space is derived from Pradhana and time. Space would come down here. So time is not a byproduct or a parameter like in Vaisheshika, but it's an essential ingredient that propels change. One interesting thing that we can see is that in Srimad Bhagavatam, they calculate time from the atom, which is something that is done nowadays, such as in cesium clocks. The topology of time in Vedanta is cyclical, as you see here, cycles within cycles. And can space and time be combined? They're correlated, but they have different natures. We have dancing in a time freeze. So there is a time freeze. They do have time freezes, but there's only time travel in one direction. There are wormholes in the Puranas, and we see that especially in the Kumbh Mela, where they use the Ganges, the river Ganges, to go from different places in space. And yogis, they travel interstellar. They do interstellar travel by changing the composition of their bodies, going from Earth, and evoluting it back to water, back to fire, back to air, and finally to space. And when they get to space, their bodies are no longer impeded by time or space. I'm going to skip this for now, and so just I can keep to time. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. I'm going to request you to keep an eye on the Q&A box. If there is any question, please do answer that. But I would like to bring this to an end today and just bring to everyone's attention that we are going to have a whole series of fascinating talks again tomorrow, which is Sunday, the 21st of July. And the theme is going to be science, cosmology, and the BI network. So expect talks pertaining to consciousness, the relationship with the universe, how did the universe begin? How did our cosmos begin? And also talks related to the Bhaktivedanta Institute in Russia. There's the Institute of Science and Philosophy that will be covered as well, the outreach and research programs associated with that institute. One of the interesting things is that we are going to cover the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, the TOVP, the chandelier. So Vedic cosmology and astronomy related to the TOVP will be covered along with the science museum that has been planned for the world's largest temple that is coming up in Mayapur. And the grand finale will be a panel and general Q&A about the BI network, resources, opportunities, and getting involved. So thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you, all of you, again tomorrow for the grand finale of this inaugural BI Summer School. Thank you very much and have a great day.